supposed to preach this week, right? Brother Zachary had put the service together along with the worship team, thinking through every little detail of how this was going to go, coming up with a sermon full of his particular wisdom and power and love as a servant leader here. But it's me today, and we're going to be talking about violence and nonviolence and pacifism, so it's going to be a piece of cake. I got it all figured out, and I'll just let you know. We'll get there in about 15 minutes. But I've been preaching and in full-time ministry for many years, but I know that doesn't mean much to folks if they don't know you, and I know that we're cool and we're getting to know each other, but we're still in process, and I don't know about really holding this preaching space, right, and asking the things of you that a preacher does, especially when it's heavy, right? So I'll just say as I begin that I deeply respect the power and privilege of the preaching role. And I approach it with deep humility and holy fear, hoping to honor the kindness of your attention today. I just ask for your grace as I step into something sacred and profoundly vulnerable. Violence is atmospheric in America. It's almost a point of pride. There's a rugged wildness and danger in the American mythos. An ambient volatility ready to erupt at any moment. And we've been watching these eruptions. In Minneapolis, most acutely right now, as ICE agents tear people's bodies apart on their jobs, rip them out of their vehicles as they drive home, shoot them in their face as they stop to look after their neighbors. And this is wonderful, according to the president and his supporters who are lodged in nearly every significant seat of power. In fact, they've quadrupled ICE's budget, and they've promised to increase an already eye-popping $1 trillion military budget by another $500 billion. They've threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act and suspend all pretense to democracy. They couch all this in Nazi slogans, like one homeland, one people, one heritage, emblazoned across all their banners. They nail every Nazi dog whistle possible, most recently with this new whole milk campaign, clearly signifying their object to purify our country and restore white power to a snide, preening, and cruel dominance. And we reject these violences. We deny the world that they are trying to create, full of fear and death. We persist in reasserting a future beyond all violence, where all are loved and fed, free and home, where life in all its fullness flourishes. And we're rooted in a centuries-old heritage of resistance to violence, creatively and courageously practicing our love and defense of the vulnerable. Yet in our clarity of conviction about future things, about the peace towards which we struggle and strain, how exactly do we imagine we get there? The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. believed that violent opposition to violence would only breed the very antipathy at root in the original antagonism. Rather than resolve the contradiction between forces, violence would heighten and intensify them. He was convinced that violence is self-perpetuating and that its use could never lead to its own eradication. Instead, he says, we confront violence with love, swaddling it, suffocating it, engulfing it whole with an irresistible beauty and grace that could capture the very heart of a diseased culture and transform it into understanding, reconciliation, and repair. But we have to ask the question today, has his philosophy, has his faith been vindicated? Another figure of that era, certainly connected to the civil rights struggle, but also with the more radical revolutionary movement of the time, Kwame Ture, earlier known as Stokely Carmichael, said that, quote, "For nonviolence to work, your oppressor must have a conscience, and the United States has none." In other words, he felt that the country he existed in as a black man was not inspired to sympathy, at the sight of black suffering. However principled and righteous, however undeserved, no white people relished it. They picnicked and took family photos in front of lynching victims. Black suffering was part of what made whiteness so enjoyable. And the pain of black suffering was white catharsis. So no, he thought, to accept the violence of the state on our bodies is neither noble nor productive. It just gets us killed. And there's no redemption in that. Some historians have said that the victories of the civil rights struggle, real as they were, but also limited as they were as vehicles toward real liberation, were only enabled by the pressure of revolutionary militancy. It was the weight of armed and ideological groups like the Black Panthers, the Black Liberation Army, who sat on the other side of King's mediation that made his proposal more palatable. If it's between nominal civil inclusion of black people and a revolutionary reorganization of society and the white power that structures it, we'll take the former, was their calculation. And black revolutionaries didn't turn to armed struggle because they were bored, of course. People in general don't put themselves in positions of danger except by necessity. Black militancy was a response to the danger that they faced and continue to face in an anti-black country. And they also saw themselves within the anti-colonial movement that was sweeping the globe, as colonized people took up arms and shook off their oppressors, forcing out the plunderers who would not be driven away by any other means. And as uncomfortable as the thought might make some of us, how does one tell the enslaved, the colonized, the criminalized, and killable people of this world that they have no right to resist by any means necessary? And what do we do with the fact that we also exist in a state of war? The racial and class war that simmers and erupts all throughout the history of this white supremacist settler colony. Those contradictions haven't resolved. The terrain shifts this way and that, but the violence inherent to the relationship between racialized people and between the exploited masses and their exploiters has never disappeared, even if it goes tenuously dormant for a moment. So what tools are at our disposal to resolve these tensions and build towards a real and lasting peace? Not the peace of the graveyard, as the powerful crush all dissent and the machine churns steadily on unencumbered, but the peace of true justice, freedom, and wholeness for every living thing. The people in power bear no cost at our conventional resistance, it seems. 1 million people march in the streets, and what is it to them? They happily report that no one was hurt. Even the litter was picked up by the marchers. The complaint is publicly lodged, but do our leaders care what we want? Business continues apace. Without a real disruption of the flow of capital, the smooth functioning of processes of accumulation and profit, the forces organizing our exploitation and abandonment will never willfully concede back to us what we're owed. So how do we incur a cost to the ruling class? How do we protect our loved ones from the agents it deploys to discipline us back into conformity with its predatory patterns? Renee Good's wife said, "We had whistles, they had guns." So should we have guns too? I guess I don't know what reciprocated violence would accomplish, except the justification of a fascist state's desire to brand us as terrorists and unleash the full force of the world's most expensive and powerful military on us. In some sense, the whole strategy is to provoke us to violence, so that martial law can be invoked and power can be consolidated. But then they were going to do that anyways, so why not take a shot at stopping them? Clearly, I don't have the answers. Brother Zachary was prepared to talk about Jesus and the violence of his whip. From what I can tell, Jesus wasn't as consistent on this issue as many folks like to believe, which might have been the tension that Brother Zachary was going to take us into. Jesus drove out the temple merchants. He told his disciples to carry swords. He said, "I've come not to bring peace, but a sword." Even as he said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Even as he stayed Peter's sword, which cut off a Roman soldier's ear, and healed that ear, and said, "The one who lives by the sword will die by it." So maybe the great rabbi's wisdom wasn't in any final determination about the moral status of violence, but in the contradiction itself. What we aspire to and what the moment might demand are so overwhelmingly fraught with complexity. And maybe the desire to find an unimpeachable moral position is simply the wrong framework. The work of love, of defending one another, of building towards a better world beyond violence is never going to fit into neat and tidy philosophical categories. So I'm certainly not here to tell anyone how to think about the question of violence or nonviolence, but to lay out the difficulty, to offer some tools as you process the horrors of the moment and the responsibility each of us has to create peace wherever and however we can. The stakes are impossibly high, and we can't be wrong. We can't leave anyone behind. We can't compromise in our care for anyone. And we can't buckle in the face of a quickly rushing tide of fascist aggression. We need militancy, even pacifist militancy, in our drive to meet these forces with a requisite force of our own. We're called to protect one another and honor all life, and it'll be our courage and creativity that makes a way through the snarl of confusion and contradiction. It'll be our love for one another that saves us. So all this leads me to wonder if there's hubris in dogmatism, in finger-wagging at anyone who resists differently. We all have our principles and convictions, and I honor the integrity of anyone truly seeking a future marked by peace. I'm not prepared to police anyone. And for that reason, there's no political proposal here. There's nothing concrete I can leave you with. Even if I had it to offer, I haven't earned the right in this community to ask you to hold something like that. Reverend Peggy and Brother Zachary are committed pacifists, and certainly would preach a different sermon with a clearer sense of what our community identity is, offering their convictions as servant leaders of this community. They would speak to the power of pacifism and resolve some of these tensions, calling us to a particular way forward. But this week, you got me and all my personal wrestling with this moment and the responsibility laid at our feet. So all I'll say definitively is that I am devoted to being in struggle with you, to working it out as a community, to embracing the terrifying challenge of the moment and finding tools of gentleness and grace that disarm and diffuse. Whatever these next months and years bring, I'm here to be led by you, to work alongside you, to care for your wounds as I offer you mine, as we struggle toward a future full of peace, beyond war, beyond diseased imaginations and dictators and Nazis. I aspire to be a pacifist too, if not now in this world, in the new one that we will build together. Because I do believe that we will win. I do believe that love is inextinguishable. I do believe that communities like ours are the soil of totalizing universal liberation. I do believe that we will make a way together to a place where peace flourishes and guns are silent, where starlings murmurate in place of fighter jets, where borders dissolve and difference is authentically celebrated, where children grow old and our elders grow childlike, where nature returns to her rhythms and we attune ourselves to her movements, where the thought of lifting a hand against one another is literally unthinkable, and all our living and all our dying is oriented toward the commonness of our love for one another, where peace makes a home in all things. Thank you for listening. Thank you for dreaming with me. Ashe.